Hi, everyone, and welcome to this fifth Dev Diary. This week, we're having a look at files/assessments and also some more development has been going on with the boards. So let's just get straight into it. So what are files/assessments? Now, I haven't really settled on what I think are a good name for this, but what it is sometimes when we're dealing with AIs and when we're dealing with large language models, we want to provide some additional information that may be outside of its knowledge base. So typically, large language models have a knowledge cutoff date. So that's a date from which any information that prior to that date may be included in their training data, but information that's after that training or after that date is definitely not in their data. It's also, in my experience, quite beneficial to draw the attention of the language model to specific things. And so we do that by providing additional information, even if it was in the training data, just to reground the model in the information that we're interested in. It helps reduce the chance of it confabulating or making up information as it is. So you can see here, I've got basically just a normal kind of file browsing interface you'd be familiar with many other platforms have, where you've got a file in a table and you can kind of navigate around. That's not the exciting bit. Obviously, what we want to do is actually start to pull in some more interesting summarizations of this information. So let's just dive into this file. Now, this is a PDF that was on aging and expenditures of the Canadian health system. And what you'll see here is that I've got a bit of a different approach to providing summarization. So instead of just asking the platform to provide just a basic summary, we're actually using different approaches. And these are three different approaches that I've sourced from a repository of different prompts. I've augmented them for the purposes of this platform, and I will continue to bring in different approaches. And I'll put the link into that project because it's an open source project. And I encourage you, if you're interested in prompts, to have a look at that. But you can see there's three different approaches here. One is to extract the patterns. The other one is to extract the predictions. And the third one is to extract the wisdom. And so the reason why I'm taking different approaches to summarizing this document is that I might want to call attention to different things. These documents could be quite long. They could be hundreds of pages. So how can we give the AI a hint about what we're looking at? So in this case, I've summarized this document looking for patterns, and you can see it's pulled out various facts. It's then looked at, well, what are the meta facts? What are the conclusions it can drive? What's its analysis? What's the best five points that it can make? And also, what are advice for leaders? So that's a little bit different than what a strict summary was. Now, if I wanted to do something different, for example, to extract the predictions, it's quite easy. I can just change the approach and give the AI a little minute to start to work. And you can see that it's a much shorter summary. This document actually is not too focused on creating that many predictions, but you can see here it's got some demographic ones, which are pretty basic. We could also do things like extract the wisdom, for example. And what this prompt is doing is it's looking for the patterns underneath and trying to find what can it glean from this file. So I'll give it a minute to generate everything here. You can see it's pulled out quite a lot of facts. This is a long document. I think it's about 25 pages. And it's then generated that recommendations. But for my purpose, I actually want to just remain on the pattern. So I'll just click and regenerate that again. So I can leave that to generate in the background. and I'll just pop back over to the main interface. So this is just the very first version of this interface. It's quite easy to then create and add a document. I'm not going to go into that detail because most of you should be familiar with how things like that work. It's just going to redirect us to the page now. And in the future, we can look at adding different metadata or different criteria, the summaries. I'm thinking about maybe contextualizing the summary to say, well, what's the impact of this document or this piece of information? Where we can use things like the strategic profile to generate that. But right now, I'm just leaving it as basic as possible because I think we can do that mixing and that contextualization in the boards. So let's go have a look at the boards now. So there's been a little bit of development, a little bit more development, and I'm just going to start with a new board because I want to start from fresh. So we normally, when doing things, when doing something like a scenario development process, we start with a focus question. So let's just start with a focus question. And if you remember, my strategic profile is that I'm an aged care business, and so I'm worried about disruption from overseas private equity. And so we can generate some focus questions based on that. So it's going to go back and come up with some questions that might be relevant for me. So better compete. Yes, that's a good one. Key strategies. Yes. Risk and opportunities. Perfect. So I've got a concern. I'm worried about disruption by private equity. It's now given me some areas to look into that. So let's do a trend scan for each of these areas. Now, this is what we've looked at previously. So let me just create these trend scans. So I'm actually just going to hit search on these two. And if you remember, we can click on these trends to get the actual information. Let me just put me over there. So we'll just add a couple of these ones. For the purpose of the demo, I'm just adding them kind of randomly. Now, the other thing we can do is we can add in our file assessments. Now, we just had a look at those files. And the one that we were looking at was the aged care expenditures. So I can pull that one in. And then if you remember, we left it on patterns. So these become very similar to trends. So whereas this is a bit of content that's been generated based on what we've been able to sample from some online searches and some work the AI has done to synthesize these trends. Each of these file assessments, and the reason why I'm calling them assessments is because oftentimes I think when doing this work, they tend to be market scans or market research or things like that. So they're less of a trend. They're more of a point in time, hence why I'm using the word assessment. But when we're working on these generating scenarios, we can actually start to combine them. So now that we've got our trends and we've got our assessment, the next step is to generate some scenarios. So I'll just drop a scenario generating node on the screen now. And you can kind of see how things are evolving a little bit with the UI in that in these ones, I've had to click to kind of refresh things. Here, we're sort of evolving it so that you, just as you connect it, and it's being very transparent about what trends are being connected here and also that assessment. So the scenarios, I'm now looking at all four of those things. So 3 trends and 1 assessment. And I can choose now what kind of scenarios I want to have. So I can start with the 2x2. We also have a field, and I haven't implemented the archetypes yet, which would be like your growth, collapse, disruption, and so on. So we can generate our uncertainties. Now, this is going to look at the trends and the assessments. It's not actually bringing in our strategic profile, which we can now bring in as well. So I've made this a little bit more explicit that here's my strategic profile. So this is what we looked at before. But the reason why I've put this in here is I want to be really explicit about it being included now in the scenario. So there might be an option or a bit of analysis you want to do where you don't want to have that strategic profile. And I thought about if that was baked in, which it was before, it didn't really give you that flexibility. So if I generate these uncertainties, you can see that it's going to change now to have things that are focused more on what that profile is. But I think it's actually quite interesting to have a look maybe at something that's not, just to do a little bit of what ifs, a little bit of exploratory work here. So I can pull up, say that we've got these uncertainties. I can generate these titles. And don't worry, I will be cleaning up the UI quite a lot. It's really about just getting the kind of flow working. And we can see this as a 2x2, so it's the high and low of those two different uncertainties. The other thing we could do is something like generating scenario fields. So in a scenario generation process, scenario fields will look at multiple uncertainties and the combinations of those different uncertainties. And so you can see it's come up with 6 fields, and these each are made up of different uncertainties the AI has determined. And so we can say, all right, I'm interested in a green renaissance, tech-driven equity, and a sustainable struggle, for example. Now, we can click to create our scenario nodes. Now, each of these nodes represents an individual scenario. So you can see there's the green renaissance, sustainable struggle, batches, one in the generator. And, I can untick these ones. I could go back to here if I wanted to mix and match my approaches as well. I could hit create the nodes and it'll actually go and create all of those. So you can have as many scenarios as you like. So you can see it. That one's actually too long. So we can hit the button. I don't think I'll be able to get to the button on that one. Just goes to show you that we should do a little bit more testing, but that one's not as long, so we can't hit the button. So let's hit it and generate our scenario. We can generate one here, and we can generate one here. Now, what it's doing is creating a narrative scenario. I'm not going to read this out, but you can see that it involves a main character. Now, it's picked up, remember, one of our assessments was set in Canada, so it's actually picked up that this person's from Toronto, and it's telling a bit of a story about a day in the life of, in this case, Maya in 2034. We can also see this one has also picked up in Toronto. It is again, day in the life of Amara, who is living in a world that has high adoption of sustainability, niche for values aligned investing, and strained due to an aging population. And then our third scenario here, again, based in Toronto, moderate adoption of sustainability, mainstream investment, and in a managed aging population. So that's great. We've got those 3 scenarios. They're interesting, but it's always important to understand what does it mean. So what's the so what? The other thing I will be working on is a layout engine to help kind of streamline that, so you don't have to keep going back, fishing things, and connecting them. So here we go. We'll connect our 3 scenarios to our impact assessment. Now, an impact assessment is going to look at the scenarios, and it's also, because we've disconnected our organizational profile, I might want to actually connect that in to help make it contextual and relevant for this business. So what I can do now is these three scenarios are in the inputs of this impact assessment, and we can go off and generate what are the impacts. I'll just give it a moment to start to generate some of these things. Now it's done those across each scenario, which might be the way that you want things to work. The other option you have, of course, is you can combine the scenarios and generate one set of impacts. So it really depends on how you want to approach solving these problems. I think for me, it's very interesting to look at this combined, because now we're starting to narrow down to get to some practical actions that we might take as an organization. So we know that, for example, we need advanced ICT, we might need cultural transformation, we need some flexible work models. So these might be responses that we want to take to solve some of the problems that have been raised through the scenario process, but also some of the problems inside our strategic profile here. And you can see if I just disconnect that and regenerate, a different set of responses are going to come out, because it's no longer taking the contextualized point of view from the organization. So for my organizational profile. So what you'll do is be able to click these responses and then go on to create your courses of action. Your courses of action are where you're going to start to actually plan out each of these responses to kind of work backwards from what your goal or what you're trying to attain to some practical steps that, again, are contextualized for your organization. But I haven't developed that yet. So this is where we've got to. But when we zoom out, you can start to see how things are hanging together, that we've gone from our focus question of how can we compete with overseas private equity firms through some trends. We've generated some scenarios, and then we've come up with some actions. Now, the key thing to work on is once we get the end-to-end process in place, it's really then fine-tuning the prompts and how the AI is being tuned in the background to make sure that we're focusing on the right things. And so this is the UI I think I'm trying to get towards, where we're really clear about what our inputs are, and that there's options that you'll be able to dial up or dial down. And so some of the options that we might do would be allow you to set the options for what the uncertainties are. Or for example, here to say, which trend do we want to weight more or less? Or do we want to apply a weighting equally to the trends and set them maybe at a lower rate and then have the assessments rated or weighted much higher? Do we want to take the strategic profile? Do we want to set that at a really high a weighting, and so on? So that's really just some stuff to work on in the future. But that's all that I've got to show today. We'll be back again in a couple weeks for another edition of the Dev Diary. But as you can see, we're getting pretty close to having something that is usable and can generate some value for people. So until then, take care, and we'll see you soon.